The ICU was alive with the quiet terror of a hospital under siege. Monitors beeped relentlessly, punctuating the low hum of ventilators, while oxygen hissed in measured bursts like a silent, unyielding heartbeat. The fluorescent lights overhead cast a cold, sterile glow, making the faces of the exhausted nurses appear almost spectral. Time had become elastic here, stretching and snapping unpredictably, measured only in the rise and fall of patient vitals. And then, in the midst of this orchestrated chaos, something impossible happened. Michael Thompson, 42 years old, lay motionless beneath the sheets, his body battered by the relentless storm of COVID-19. Doctors had induced a coma weeks earlier, a last resort intervention as his lungs and organs began to fail. Machines hummed and hissed, charting every shallow breath, every irregular heartbeat. And then, without warning, his fingers twitched. A subtle movement, almost invisible, but enough to make the veteran nurse standing beside him freeze mid-step, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Doctor?" "He's moving," she whispered, her voice trembling. The room seemed to constrict as a ripple of tension spread. Monitors continued their cold, unfeeling alarms, but now they were punctuated by the sound of hope, or maybe confusion. Michael's eyes flickered open, clouded yet piercing, and the room fell into a suspended silence. No one spoke. The beeping seemed to hold its breath along with the staff. His vitals were erratic, swinging unpredictably between near death and improbable stability, defying every chart, every expectation, every textbook they had ever relied upon. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, Michael's attending physician, leaned closer, her pulse quickening. She had seen miracles in her career, but nothing like this. Every test, every intervention had failed to explain how a man so ravaged by disease could simply awaken. Nurses exchanged stunned glances, hands hovering over buttons and charts as if the act of touching something could shatter the fragile balance between life and death. Sweat beaded on foreheads, and the sterile scent of disinfectant mingled with the iron tang of blood and antiseptic. Time slowed. Michael's gaze shifted toward the ceiling, then scanned the faces around him with a lucidity that defied the weeks of unconsciousness. He did not speak immediately. Words felt inadequate, unnecessary. Instead, he blinked once, then twice, and a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. The room, heavy with disbelief, began to exhale collectively. Yet in that smile, there was something else, a quiet knowing, as if he had glimpsed something the rest of them could not. The monitors resumed their indifferent chorus, but their warnings no longer carried the same weight. Something had changed. The ICU, usually a theater of relentless precision and control, had become a chamber of awe, a place where medicine met mystery. Doctors scribbled notes, yet no chart could capture what they were witnessing. Nurses held their breaths, afraid to blink, as if the act of acknowledgement might undo the impossible. Michael's eyes, deep and searching, seemed to harbor a secret, a memory, a fragment of some world beyond comprehension. And in that moment, a question settled over the room like a shadow. How had he survived? Every logical explanation had failed. Every prediction of mortality had been wrong. And as the lights flickered softly above, the staff realized they were witnessing not just recovery, but the beginning of something they could not explain. Michael Thompson had awakened. And the S before the ICU, before the miraculous awakening, Michael Thompson's body had been a battlefield. Early 2021 brought a brutal storm. COVID-19, severe and unrelenting. What began as a persistent fever and relentless fatigue quickly escalated into full-blown pneumonia, his lungs filling with fluid like a storm-swept riverbank, threatening to drown the life inside him. Doctors tried everything the medical textbooks prescribed. Intubation, mechanical ventilation, high-dose steroids, and when hope waned, experimental treatments that promised little more than a chance. Acute respiratory distress syndrome, ARDS, was their diagnosis. In lay terms, it meant Michael's lungs were failing, incapable of exchanging oxygen and carbon dioxide properly, leaving every cell in his body gasping. But it wasn't just his lungs. Multi-organ inflammation had taken root, a vicious cascade triggered by a hyperactive immune system, a cytokine storm, raging unchecked inside his veins. It was a war the doctors could only attempt to slow, not to win. The ICU staff remembers him before the coma. They recall a man who, despite suffering, maintained a flicker of humor, a resilience that made the fear around him palpable. He joked about the taste of hospital food, one nurse recalls, her voice soft, haunted. Even when he was hooked up to 10 different machines, he found a way to smile. But his family, barred from visiting due to COVID protocols, endured a quiet torment. Through video calls and anxious phone updates, they watched their father and husband fight a battle they could not touch, could not influence, only hope for. Fear carved deep lines into their faces, shadows beneath their eyes heavier than any medical monitor could measure. Doctors worked tirelessly, understanding the physics and biology of his illness, yet helpless against the inexplicable unpredictability of the human body. ECMO support, extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, was brought in, a machine designed to act as an external lung, oxygenating blood while giving the lungs a chance to heal. It was invasive, demanding and risky, but necessary. Each procedure was a delicate dance. a battle against time, against the virus, against a body betraying itself. Amid the clinical urgency, moments of quiet reflection pierced the tension. Nurses paused, whispering prayers or silent hopes, rubbing foreheads with a weariness that transcended fatigue. The narrative isn't just about organs and machines. It's about human fragility, about the invisible emotional labor that pervades every ICU shift. Each beep of a monitor became a heartbeat, each alarm a potential death knell, and through it all, Michael's body fought in ways neither science nor experience could fully explain. By the time the medical team made the decision to induce a coma, it was clear survival was uncertain. The procedures were standard, necessary, grounded in decades of research, but even the most seasoned professionals understood that in COVID ICUs, standard often met its match against the unpredictable, lethal force of the virus. And yet, it is this very unpredictability, this fragile, defiant struggle of life against death, that sets the stage for what comes next. The audience is now prepared to witness not only a battle of biology, but a story of human resilience, where the improbable begins to touch the edges of the impossible. Story of his survival would haunt them, and all who heard it, for years to come. The night air in the ICU was heavy with tension, though no windows revealed the world outside. Inside, fluorescent lights flickered softly above the rows of patients, casting a pale, unforgiving glow across pale faces and glinting monitors. Michael Thompson lay at the center of it all, his body teetering on the edge of life and death. The alarms erupted suddenly, shrill, urgent, impossible to ignore. Oxygen saturation plummeted, dipping into territory few would survive. Blood pressure dropped dangerously, every reading a stark reminder that time was no longer on anyone's side. The team reacted instantly, a practiced choreography of crisis and hope. Nurses adjusted ventilators, checked IV lines, and whispered urgent commands to each other. Dr. Mitchell barked instructions, her calm exterior belying a racing heartbeat. Each movement was precise, every second weighted with consequence. And yet, despite the flurry of expertise, there was an almost surreal undercurrent to the room, an unspoken tension that life might slip through their fingers regardless of skill or intervention. Amid the chaos, a young resident noticed something extraordinary. Michael's face, though pale and drawn, carried an unusual serenity, as if he were observing the room from a place beyond its fluorescent confines. His eyelids fluttered in a rhythm that seemed disconnected from the mechanics of the body, his chest rising and falling in slow, measured breaths that defied the alarms around him. It was a strange calm in the storm, a silence in the midst of life-threatening crisis, and it unsettled even the most experienced clinicians. The machines told one story, the human eye another. Monitors beeped warnings, flashing red across digital screens, yet Michael's presence suggested something more. Nurses whispered to one another, exchanging looks of disbelief, their voices low and urgent like a secret shared under pressure. Each intervention, the sedation adjustment, the ventilator recalibration, the administration of emergency medications, felt like a gamble, a desperate negotiation with fate. And yet, he remained poised on the threshold, neither fully succumbing nor fully reclaiming life. The room's sensory details are vivid and relentless. The hiss of oxygen fills the space like a living creature. The cold linoleum presses against the nurse's shoes. The walls reverberate with muted alarms, and the faint smell of antiseptic is constant, sharp, almost choking. Hands tremble slightly as doctors press stethoscopes to chest and neck, reading rhythms that do not conform to expectation. Every beep is a question mark. Every breath, a fragile statement of defiance, minutes stretch into hours. The team fights tirelessly, not knowing whether the next moment will be their last chance. Michael's body continues to oscillate between precarious stability and near collapse, a pendulum swinging over the abyss. And in these moments, something unspoken lingers, an almost mystical tension, the sense that science has reached its limit, that something beyond charts and monitors is at play. His eyes, half-lidded yet unnervingly aware, seem to hold fragments of a world the staff cannot access. It is a night of paradoxes, chaos and stillness, fear and awe, mortality and the faintest glimmer of survival. And then, somewhere between the flashing alarms and whispered prayers, the ICU becomes a witness to the impossible. Michael Thompson hovers on the edge, caught between two realities, leaving doctors, nurses, and viewers alike suspended in wonder, dread, and disbelief. The night imprints itself on everyone present, a memory that refuses to fade, a haunting reminder of the fragility and mystery of life. Morning light seeped hesitantly through the blinds, cutting thin lines across the ICU floor, and with it came a quiet that felt almost unnatural after the chaos of the night. Monitors that had screamed warnings now displayed numbers that suggested life, but not by any logic that the medical team could explain. Michael Thompson, who had hovered on the brink of death just hours earlier, had stabilized. No new medications, no surgical interventions, no extraordinary procedure. Nothing in the hospital's arsenal could account for the sudden and inexplicable recovery. And yet, here he was, eyes open, breathing steadily and very much alive. Dr. Mitchell stood beside his bed, unable to fully articulate the astonishment that washed over her. Months of experience and decades of medical education could not prepare her for the scene unfolding. "I've seen miracles," she later admitted in reflection, "but nothing like Michael. It was as if the body itself refused to surrender." The nurses, some with tears clinging to the corners of their eyes, exchanged looks that conveyed awe, relief, and a deep, unshakable wonder. Machines hummed, alarms silenced, and the room held its breath, as though aware that a boundary had been crossed, a line between the explainable and the impossible. Michael's voice was weak, yet deliberate. He spoke slowly, hesitating to frame the experience in words that might sound unbelievable, even to those who had witnessed it firsthand. He described a sensation of floating, of leaving his body behind while observing the ICU from above. He recalled encountering lights that were both blinding and comforting, and shadows that seemed to reach out from some distant, unfamiliar place. And then, most haunting of all, he spoke of familiar faces, loved ones long past, who appeared to guide him back. The nurses, many of whom had never heard such accounts outside of textbooks or whispered stories, listened in quiet reverence, unsure whether to approach with skepticism or acceptance. There was a vulnerability to Michael's recollections, a fragile honesty that made the staff hold their collective breath. He struggled to convey the emotions, the overwhelming mix of fear and peace, the sensation of being both nowhere and everywhere. And yet, even as he spoke, the recovery itself remained the ultimate enigma. His lungs, his organs, every biological marker aligned as if the body had repaired itself in defiance of medical prediction. The cinematic nature of the moment is palpable. Slow-motion recollections of medical staff, adjusting ventilators, monitoring charts, and wiping sweat from their brows, play out against the quietude of a stabilized patient. Shadowed lighting highlights the ethereal quality of Michael's near-death experience, while the steady beeping of monitors becomes almost musical, a testament to resilience and the unfathomable complexity of life. Every glance exchanged between doctors and nurses carries unspoken acknowledgement. Something extraordinary has occurred. A fracture in the predictable rules of human physiology is a glimpse into the unknown, and beneath the clinical astonishment lies the human resonance, the sense that life, in its rawest form, is capable of resisting even the most precise scientific calculations. Michael's unexplainable recovery leaves lingering questions that the staff cannot answer and that will haunt them for years. The story of that night, that impossible morning, is more than a medical anomaly. It is a testament to the fragile, mysterious, and uncharted territory where consciousness, biology, and human spirit intersect. As Michael's eyes meet those of Dr. Mitchell, a silent understanding passes between them. The ICU, a space defined by rationality and procedure, has been forever altered by the presence of something inexplicable. And in that quiet, almost sacred moment, the audience is left suspended, grappling with wonder, uncertainty, and the profound possibility that some aspects of human survival remain beyond science, beyond prediction, and perhaps beyond comprehension. Weeks had passed since Michael Thompson's awakening, yet the echoes of that night lingered in every corner of the ICU. For Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the attending physician, the case had become a quiet obsession. In her office, surrounded by charts, journals, and the faint hum of fluorescent lights, she often found herself staring at the notes from Michael's case, searching for patterns that simply weren't there. How could a body on the brink of collapse recover so suddenly, so completely? The question had no easy answer, and that absence of explanation gnawed at her, both professionally and personally. Other staff shared her unease. Nurses who had cared for Michael recall moments when, in the stillness after rounds, they would exchange looks of disbelief, silently acknowledging the defiance of human physiology they had just witnessed. Respiratory therapists spoke of his oxygen levels, which had stabilized without intervention, as though the body itself had chosen to fight back in a way medicine could not command. It was a humbling experience, a confrontation with the limits of knowledge and the unpredictable resilience of life. The reflections were not only clinical, but profoundly human. Dr. Mitchell admitted, months later, that the case had altered her perspective on mortality. "You train to intervene, to measure, to predict," she explained. "But with Michael, you realize that sometimes life is its own force. Sometimes it's something we can witness, but never fully understand." There was awe in her voice, tempered with the quiet weight of responsibility, the knowledge that even in the world of medicine, where precision is paramount, there are moments that escape explanation. The staff wrestled with questions that hovered in the periphery of their minds. Could this be an anomaly of biology? A fluke of chemistry and cells aligning against odds? Or had they glimpsed something deeper, an uncharted aspect of consciousness that medicine had yet to quantify? Every discussion, every reflection carried with it the emotional gravity of a near-death event witnessed firsthand. Guilt and gratitude mingled in the air as staff recognized the fragility of life they had held in their hands, and the privilege of observing a survival that defied expectation. There was also a subtle sense of transformation. In the weeks that followed, routines shifted imperceptibly. Staff approached patients with heightened empathy, a quiet reverence for the unpredictability of human resilience. ICU corridors felt different, hushed in some ways, alive in others, charged with the unspoken understanding that life often operates on a plane beyond charts, protocols, and statistics. For the audience, this reflection serves as a contemplative pause, a window into the human side of medicine. It is not just the story of a miraculous recovery, it is the story of how witnessing the unexplainable shapes those who dedicate themselves to saving lives. The doctors, nurses, and therapists carry the weight of wonder and uncertainty, their minds forever altered by a patient who defied the limits of science. And as Dr. Mitchell closes the file, her eyes linger on a simple note scrawled in the margins. We may never understand, but we must bear witness. It is a quiet acknowledgement, a recognition that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, only witnessed, respected, and remembered, a truth that will haunt them and the audience long after the story ends. Even months after the ICU's alarms fell silent, Michael Thompson's story continued to resonate like a shadow that refused to fade. Though he had physically recovered, something intangible lingered, an echo of the near-death experience that had left doctors and nurses in silent awe. Michael spoke of visions that persisted, fragments of light and shadow, faces he knew and faces he didn't, and an overwhelming sense of being caught between two worlds. For him, the experience was both terrifying and serene, a paradox that left him searching for words adequate to describe what he had endured. Medical experts wrestled with explanations. Neurologists speculated about rare cortical activity in comatose patients, unusual synapses firing in ways yet undocumented. Immunologists considered that an extraordinary immune response, triggered by the virus and his unique physiology, might have facilitated a rapid recovery. Yet even these hypotheses fell short. None could account for the subjective experiences, the floating, the lights, the encounters with the departed, that Michael described with vivid clarity. For the scientists, the case became a puzzle at the edge of reason. A reminder that medicine, for all its power, still brushes against the unknowable. Michael's family also bore the weight of this mystery. His wife, Karen, recounted quiet nights sitting beside him as he struggled to articulate what he had seen. He would pause, she said, her voice trembling, and just stare, as if he were back there, somewhere I can't reach. Their children noticed a change too, not in his humor or warmth, which remained, but in his gaze, which seemed deeper, reflective, almost aware of dimensions beyond the ordinary. For them, the recovery was a miracle, but it carried a haunting undercurrent. Life had returned, yes, but not unchanged. The ICU staff, too, could not shake the enigma. Even in routine rounds, Michael's case appeared in conversations, a quiet question mark hovering over clinical certainty. They debated endlessly. Was this a biological anomaly, a rare convergence of circumstances, or something more profound? Nurses who had witnessed his awakening spoke in hushed tones about the unsettling serenity he exuded during his near-death moments, a calm that suggested he had glimpsed something beyond the limits of human perception. It was a mystery that refused closure, lingering in hallways and charts, in the quiet pauses between alarms. The documentary's tone here is both contemplative and suspenseful, inviting the audience to linger in the tension between science and the unexplained. Reenactments depict Michael's visions in soft focus, fleeting lights, shadowed forms, and brief glimpses of faces that feel known yet unreachable. Interviews and reflections blend seamlessly with these cinematic sequences, emphasizing the haunting ambiguity of the case. Every unanswered question becomes an emotional beat, a reminder that some experiences transcend language, metrics, and logic, and as the audience is drawn into the lingering mystery, they are left with an unsettling thought. The human body, the mind, and perhaps consciousness itself may contain depths that medicine cannot fully chart. Michael Thompson survived in ways that challenge understanding, leaving a question that reverberates long after the cameras stop rolling. How much of what we call life and death remains a mystery, waiting in the quiet spaces between science and the soul? The ICU corridors were quieter now, the chaos of emergency interventions replaced by a softer rhythm, a subdued hum of routine. Yet Michael Thompson's case lingered in every corner, like a shadow that refused to disappear. Staff who had witnessed his survival spoke of subtle changes, an unspoken humility, a renewed empathy for patients, and a heightened awareness that life can defy the most precise calculations. They carried the memory of that night with them, a quiet reverence etched into their approach to care. Michael himself was different. Though physically healthy, he carried the echoes of his near-death experience in ways both visible and intangible. His eyes, reflective and alert, hinted at knowledge that words could not fully convey. Conversations with his family revealed a man more contemplative, more attuned to the fragile beauty of life, acutely aware of the threads connecting health, consciousness, and the human spirit. He resumed work, routines, and daily life, yet the ICU, and those who had witnessed his recovery, remained a living chapter in his story. For the medical community, Michael's survival became more than a case study. Discussions about ICU protocols, experimental treatments, and near-death phenomena gained new depth, challenging doctors to consider the limits of science and the potential of human resilience. Conferences, journals, and team debriefs frequently referenced the improbability of his recovery, sparking debates not only about physiology but about consciousness, mortality, and the mysteries that science may never fully capture. Cinematic imagery emphasizes the contrast between the intensity of the ICU and the calm outside its walls. Sunlight filters through hospital windows, highlighting Michael walking along a quiet path outside, breathing deeply, feeling life in a way that only those who have faced death understand. The narrative draws the audience into reflection, juxtaposing the fragility of human existence with the profound, haunting resilience witnessed within the ICU walls. As the camera lingers on empty corridors, on nurses pausing at a patient's bedside, on the subtle interplay of light and shadow, the story concludes not with answers, but with questions. Michael Thompson survived against all odds, but the deeper truths of his experience, the visions, the near-death consciousness, the inexplicable recovery, remain unresolved. And in this unresolved space, the audience is left with a quiet, lingering unease, a haunting meditation on life, on the boundaries of science, and on the mysteries that may dwell just beyond the edge of understanding.